Good morning again. I was going to talk to just for a few minutes about the last module that you had, Module 6. Just a couple of things of interest about what you wrote, what you said, what you didn't say. I wanted to talk a little bit about children and mental health. We have a class as part of the psychosocial rehabilitation certificate that you can achieve. And it's a good class. It's on mental illness and children. But I want to mention it here because some of your answers were very interesting about what happens with children. One of the beauties about children is they all go to school. You don't always think as a child that that's a good thing to do, but there are some advantages to it. Under PL 142, sorry, didn't want to do that wrong. And its reauthorization with IDEA coming in 2002. There were some significant changes and some significant things that happened. There was a long time in this country where children did not receive any services and didn't get to go to school when they had disabilities or mental disorders, whatever, that caused them to create anything different within the school climate. And then a group of parents from Pennsylvania said, hey, our kids deserve the right to an education too. So back in 1972, we had the parents against the state of Pennsylvania. And that's what came up with PL 94-142, which is federal law. But in the reauthorization, which is IDEA or IDEA, there were some more changes that even made it more significant what happens legally to children. And I talk about it because that has a great effect on mental health. There's two ways you can get services for children. Well, let's just say two basic ways. One is that you pay for it as a family. And if you are a family that has insurance, you might get 6 weeks of some kind of treatment out of it. It's not covered under health insurance, except in some very rare cases, but then not for long periods of time or in any kind of supervised facility meant for children. That just doesn't happen. But under the law, under IDEA and under PL 94-142, we came up with a way for children to be served, and the expense of treating those children was not just on the parent. So what happens is, even from the time a child is a baby, let's say they're on the autism spectrum, as early as birth, usually about 18 months, they can be served. For instance, in our area, for you out-of-county folk, I'm not sure what your regional center is called, but what serves San Joaquin County, Stanislaus County, Tuolumne, and a couple of other foothill counties, happens to be Valley Mountain Regional Center. And they will see children at a very early age, and they will have an IEP for those children, which demands certain types of things have to happen or can happen that must be paid for by the state or through the state. Usually that money comes through school districts when it deals with K through 12. So what happens, a child is referred, anybody can refer a child for services. And they let the school know, the school psychologists know. A student study team is held, made up of teachers, parents, neighbors, whoever made the referral on the child for some special service. And a meeting is held to decide, do they need special education services, which means they need to be tested by the school psychologist. Because you don't just say this child is schizophrenic, this child is severely depressed, this child is whatever you want to do with them. You don't get to make that decision. They must be assessed for treatment. And that is a legal process. So as soon as forms can be signed by a parent, and they must be signed for whoever has educational rights, then the process starts. A number of days is assigned, and you must meet that requirement to have that assessment done within that set number of days. And at that point, when that's completed and the school psychologist heads that up, then there is an IEP. And an IEP is an individual educational plan. And that is going to be what is followed with that child. When a child is mentally ill, you may have other people that become involved from behavioral health. Mental health often initiates some of this happening when the parent has contacted them before they have contacted the school. And so it all rolls, though, into what looks like psychosocial rehabilitation, because the group meets to talk about how this child is going to learn to function and be able to survive within the system. And that's the beauty of it. It's a real model for how the adult system of care can work also. But once you start that IEP process, it could be that it's going to be for an ED kid, somebody who is emotionally disturbed. And that mandates that you have behavioral health, mental health involved in that process. They must provide services. Then the family does not have to pay. The family is part of the process also, but they don't have that expensive bill for going to outside sources to find help for their child. And the child usually spends a good portion of their day in schools, and so there's a good place for services to start, take place, teachers to be involved, school counselors to be involved, school administrators to be involved. The school can always contact the parent, or at least try to get them to be there. But a parent must be part of that process and has to sign all the legal paperwork. And all that paperwork is legally binding. And you can go online and you can read it. And I would recommend to all of you that you become familiar with IDEA. It's not that long, but it provides a whole lot of information on what happens if a child has a long-term illness such as diabetes that they're not going to get rid of anytime soon, or cystic fibrosis, or anything that is a disability of any kind. And it's written in there how you must deal with that. For instance, let's say you have cystic fibrosis. It's not unusual, in my experience, to have had to send children to Stanford, which has a really good cystic fibrosis unit, and the child would just keep their studies going from one school to the other. It was a joint effort, so they never missed going to school. So as I tell you that, and we look at the mental hospital situation, there are not facilities in the state of California that are lockup facilities, for the most part, for children. It's very hard to put them someplace and expect them not to be able to leave, or to find a facility that, other than for 72 hours, is going to keep them. That's why they tend to go to the emergency rooms. And you can do this on a Google search if you want to. It's an interesting topic that we'll cover in another class. But finding places to house children is not easy. You can remove them from the home and place them in foster homes. You can place kids in group homes. You can put them in non-public schools, which is simply a public school that you don't get to choose to go to. And for many ED kids, that's the schools that they attend. It happens to be in Stanislaus County that we have a number of those schools. And most counties don't have the number that Stanislaus has. Sacramento just lost one because of some things that the schools and the children's home were doing illegally. But the non-public school is just that. They're placed there by an IEP, and all of the IEPs in that school, mental health participates if the child is ED. They don't have to be only ED kids to be in the non-public school, but for the most part, that's what they are. If you have questions on this, be sure that you get that information. Either look it up or ask the professionals. And school psychologists are usually pretty good at it, school counselors, and people of that ilk. The California Youth Authority, the majority of kids in the California Youth Authority are people who have some sort of mental disability, whether it be mental health or learning disabilities or both. And that's true in prisons too, but for children, that is a lockup facility, and a lot of them are there because of the problems that come out of their difficulties with mental health issues. I spent about 8 years of my life working in institutions for those kinds of children. fun to work with. Staff's not always so good, but the kids are great. But anyway, very limited. You'll find a lot of kids in juvenile hall who are there because of issues that they have with mental health problems, as opposed to just being kids who get in trouble. So, very interesting thing to look at and very frustrating. Working with out of control kids is a challenge, and it's certainly a challenge for parents, whether they were a good parent or a bad parent or just an average everyday parent. Having a child out of control is not always a parent fault. It may be something that has to do with what's going on with that child that is no fault of the parents in particular. And we usually blame it on the parent because that's the easiest place to put the blame, is on bad parenting. But that's not true. They really, really are hard. And when you get a kid who's out of control and you're trying to get to the root of their problems, it's not an easy venture. There's a reason why you don't get an MFCC anymore, which was Marriage, Family, and Child Counselor. Now it's MFT, which is Family Therapy. A lot of people don't want to treat children because they are very, very difficult. The other thing I want to talk about a little bit is assessments. You know, there's an assessment right here in my hand that sometimes I use. This is called a COPS, and you can just kind of see. And it's got a whole lot of questions and things. I like it because it's easy and it's inexpensive, and it gives me a place to start with both adults and children, and there are different levels of that particular assessment that you can use for children or for adults. So that one happens to be a vocational assessment, and someone will meet with you and they'll do the assessment part of it, and then you score it, and then you talk to them. And it gives you a tool to use, you know, a place to start a conversation, if you will. And I like it because for a kid who says, I don't know, I have no idea, I don't care, it gives you something to talk about. And college students are that way. A lot of times in my office, I'll give a college student one of these and say, you have no idea what you want to major in. Take this and let's talk about what it looks like. I use that in class in Human Services 101. Everybody takes one. I also use the DOSC, which is another easy kind of assessment. It's a personality assessment. And you can look at what happens with people who may be depressed and get a good idea. So I use that in class too. There are many, many kinds of assessments. We use them every day in a lot of ways. Reading assessments, the vocational assessments, the U.S. military. You must take the ASVAB, and many of you have taken it, which is the Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery. That's how they decide what job you get to do in the service. And if you don't pass it, you're not going to get into the military, is what happens many times. They want you to succeed and give you a place to be trained and be productive. Mental health tests. If you go to the Mental Measurements Yearbook, and you can find them in the library, they're an expensive set of books. And somewhere around this house, I have a set of them. They're old, but many of the tests are still the same. But they define all the tests, and they rate them as to reliability and give you an idea of what you're going to get. And there's more than one book. I think there's 3 volumes now of those books, and they're big books. So you might want to take a look at those, and you can go online and you can get an idea of what some of those are. The Scholastic Aptitude Test, the GRE, all of those are assessment tests. And you're right, there are physical assessments that give you a variety of things that you can do. The Presidential Fitness Awards, those are certainly assessments of physical ability. So there's almost an assessment for everything that you can think of, every phobia, every mental illness, academic, whatever. Look at those. When you meet with somebody and you have trouble getting them to talk to you, sometimes a simple assessment like the one I showed you, which is this COPS, is really, really simple. Doesn't take very long. It's easy to score. And then you go back and you say, tell me what you thought about this. Well, I didn't think it was anything at all. It was kind of stupid or whatever. That's a start. and that gets you into getting them to begin or initiate a conversation with you. The same thing's true. Do you need food? I don't know. I eat when I go to the shelter, or whatever answers you get. So sometimes you find clever ways to assess their needs that kind of sucks them into having you find out what they think is important. A lot of people just want to talk also. But please, look at some of these things and, ask to see some of the psychological assessments that people give. The only people that can give those are licensed people, and I don't have any at home with me right at the moment that I can show you. But if any of you are interested, I do have them shown in the 146 class so that you can get a look at what a Rorschach is, or what the well, we can do a Myers-Briggs. I wasn't thinking of that one necessarily, but to do some of the Stanford-Binet, or some of the other tests of mental ability, or psychological abilities. There's a gang test to see what your involvement or your interest in gangs are, how susceptible you are to those kinds of issues and activities. So take a look at those. I think you'll find them interesting. And as I say, if you're interested in more of that, I'll be glad to get more samples and try to individually steer you in the right direction to look at them. We don't necessarily cover all that in this class because it's really not what we're all about, but I read your answers and I was amazed that some of you didn't quite get it on assessment. That assessment is any time you look at how somebody functions, whatever it might be, and however silly it is, how you are with dexterity, because if you don't have any dexterity ability, you probably shouldn't work on cars. So all those kinds of things become important that we might overlook otherwise. Have a good week, and we'll be looking forward to your questions and your answers. They are interesting.